Doug Kyed here at Super Bowl Radio Row with my good friend Danny Kelly from The Ringer. Danny covers the NFL, NFL draft, fantasy football. You're like a very good website all put into like a tidy person right now.
Yeah, I do a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Now I'm transitioning into the draft mode after kind of doing fantasy and the NFL all season. So yeah, it's really exciting. I love the draft.
Let's talk about the draft and let's talk about quarterbacks in general. I'm not a quarterback draft like guru or expert or anything like that,
right.
But I was at Mobile for the Senior Bowl this year, and after the second day, I asked one of like an NFC executive, I guess I'll call him, like, what have you thought about the quarterback so far? And he made a joke that Matt Corral had the best week overall, and Matt Corral was not there at the Senior Bowl. But afterwards, Malik Willis had a pretty good practice and everything. But who do you think is like the guy in this quarterback draft class?
It's tough. So I think Pickett is right now at least my top-ranked guy and probably the most sort of game-ready and polished one of the group. And it's just, but like all of them have something that's like sort of like concerning. All of them have a very intriguing skill set, but like just not quite all put together. I think a lot of these guys, each one of these guys really is going to have to like develop in the NFL. I think landing spot's going to be really important for all these guys. So I'd say Pickett is my number one. I really like Malik Willis, so I think it's pretty predictable that he was going to be the one that rose after the Senior Bowl just because of his physical traits. Like his physical traits are so much better than all these other guys. He's super fast. Like the minute he comes into the NFL, I think he's going to be the second best running quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
So, and obviously there's accuracy questions and decision-making questions, and he played at a lower level at Liberty, so there's a lot of question marks around that. But if I had to guess, like by the time we get to the draft, he's going to be the number one consensus guy, most likely just because of the traits, because of his physical, speed, strong arm, really, really strong arm. And someone's going to look at that and say, I can turn him into the next Josh Allen, where he's got some inconsistencies, inaccuracies, but we can mold him into something really good at the next level.
And it's like an impossible thing to do, to be like, okay, yeah, he's just going to be the next Josh Allen, obviously. But I'd say that it seems like the Steelers are very enamored with Malik Willis. If there's like one quarterback that I feel like is guaranteed to go in the first round, it's probably Willis. It just depends on how those other guys kind of shift around him. But out of this group of top 6 quarterbacks, really, because there's basically a top 6, how many of them do you think actually emerge as like a dependable NFL starter?
Oh man, that's tough. I would say
you don't have to give like
3,
specific names.
2 to 3. Yeah, I would say odds are, and like I said before, there's traits there for each of these guys to become a good starter, and I think that's why landing spots can be really important. It's actually probably good that some of these guys are going to go late in the first round, or maybe even in the second round, because if they're late in the first round, like in theory, they're going to be going to a pretty good team, team that has more support. Maybe they can like develop behind a starter for a year or two and then kind of like get that experience and iron out some of the issues. But I don't know. I think like we haven't talked about Ritter. I think he's got a lot of good like traits that can really be molded. He's experienced. He has a lot of starts under his belt. He's big, tall. I comped him to Daniel Jones in a good way because there's like athleticism. He's like he can play from the pocket. He sets protections. All that stuff is really good. But again, it's just what are you going to do in the NFL when you're everything's faster, everybody's like better and stronger, and I think that's just all these guys are going to take some time to develop, and so landing spot will be huge.
I know that PFF's Anthony Tresh is big on Desmond Ritter. Just one final question. I know it's still early in the process, but what do you think about, I guess, this draft class overall? Because heading into the Senior Bowl, I kind of had the impression that it wasn't a good draft class. And I was asking someone down there, and he was like, like it might be perceived that way because there's not a consensus number 1 overall pick. And there's also not a consensus like the guy at quarterback. But he didn't seem to mind the draft class overall. What are your thoughts on it?
I'm exactly the same way. In fact, so there's no consensus number 1. There's no consensus top quarterback, and there's like very few consensus. I can't say that word.
Consensus?
Consensus. Top players at each position. So it's like everybody has a favorite receiver. Like anybody you ask, it's like the top 5 guys is ordered differently. So that makes this class more fun. But I think it's actually a pretty deep class. There's going to be guys, and I was having a lot of trouble putting together like my top 32 because there's like 25 guys that could make that last like 5 group or whatever. And so the second round is going to be, I think, really like strong. Third round, there's going to be starters in the third round. So I'm excited. And from a fantasy point of view, because I do fantasy all year, like the receivers are really good. There's some intriguing running backs in this group. And obviously the quarterbacks, wild cards, but I'm really excited about it from like a dynasty point of view. Like, there's a lot of players here that I'm excited to draft, and I don't look at it like a bad class at all.
Wish I had a higher pick in my dynasty draft this year, but the old lottery didn't swing my way, which. Yeah, the league knows well about my concerns. But follow Danny's work on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly. He's got a podcast that is usually a fantasy football podcast, transitioned into a draft podcast. Well worth a listen. So check out Danny's work at The Ringer.
Thank you.